Welcome and good evening, everyone. My name is Ryan Blazik. I will be the moderator for tonight's public hearing. And this is a public hearing for proposed continued mining at the 84th Street site, resulting in creation of a lake in Zeeland Township and Ottawa County. And before we get started with the actual hearing, I'm going to go through the agenda for tonight and then some of the logistics for the Zoom meeting that we're having tonight. So first off, what you see in front of you is kind of the agenda and what we're going to be going through. We're doing the introduction right now. And there are actually two parts to this public hearing. First, there's going to be a public meeting portion of this hearing where the applicant will have an opportunity to present some information on the proposed project. So that shouldn't go any more than around 10 minutes or less to kind of go through and talk about that. And then we're going to have a question and answer session where you'll be able to ask questions related to the project. And then that will lead us into the second portion, which is the actual official hearing part of this public hearing. So you'll have a chance to make a statement, an official statement for the record related to this application and project. We'll also talk about a couple other things though, ways to submit an official comment other than the hearing tonight, where you can find other information, and then who to contact with further questions. All right, and then a couple housekeeping things. For those of you who haven't used Zoom, the Zoom application before, all lines are currently muted during this webinar, so you can hear me and hear us, but we can't hear you. You will be able to submit questions using the question box in the Zoom toolbar. You can type those questions in anytime, and then when we're actually going through the Q&A session portion of this, and then when we're doing the public hearing statements, you'll be able to raise your hand, and we'll talk about how to do that a little bit later in Zoom. And then also we're recording this meeting, so this will be posted on Eagle's YouTube channel, and then you'll also be receiving a link to the recording in a few days after the public hearing. So with that, I'd like to invite our WRD, or Water Resources Division staff, to introduce themselves.
Hi, can you see me now?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you, Holly.
Okay, all right, great, thanks. I'm Holly Vickers, and I'm the district rep for the Transportation Review Unit in the Water Resources Division of Eagle, and I'll be serving as the hearings officer for this public hearing for the submission number for Ottawa County Road Commission. And with me tonight is my boss, Mr. Jim Watling.
Hi, I'm Jim Watling. I'm the Transportation Review Unit Supervisor, and I want to welcome everybody as well.
We also have Ms. Ashley Rosnowski and Mr. Mario Fusco, who are technical people in our division.
And I should also mention we have Joel Roseberry, who is also with Environmental Support Division, who is going to be kind of assisting in Zoom in the background with as far as unmuting and doing some things in Zoom. So thank you all for those introductions. And with that, we're going to move into the Q&A, question and answer presentation section of this. And so at this point, we'd like to invite the applicant to talk about the project. And so we'll just have to find them in the attendee list. And so we've got Peter Brink, I believe. And Joel, if you see Peter, let me know. And then Brett Laughlin. Okay, I see Brett.
I unmuted Peter.
And Peter, so Peter, you can unmute yourself, or you should be able to unmute yourself at this point.
Yes, good evening.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for logging in tonight. I have a couple slides here related to your presentation on the project. I guess just let me know when you want me to advance those slides, and I can do that for you. And then just to keep us on time, we just would like to limit it to about 10 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Did you, I believe Brett was going to start.
Okay, gotcha. Do you see Brett on there, Joel?
He is also unmuted.
All right, you can unmute yourself and go ahead, Brett.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. Good evening, everyone, and just give you a brief summary of the project. The sand mining operation on the Road Commission property will involve approximately 490,000 cubic yards of sand removal from the western portion of the site over an estimated 10-year period. You'll be seeing a map here shortly on that. The property is identified as a possible park expansion to the upper Macatawa Natural Area as indicated in the Ottawa County Parks and Recreation Master Plan. This opportunity will be explored further upon completion of the mining operations. Concerns about the sand mining operations as it relates to trucking, noise, and dust control have been addressed with Zealand Township, who is the appropriate regulatory agency. Now I'd like to introduce Peter Brink with Prine and Newhoff, who will provide some remarks about the hydrogeological analysis.
Thanks, Brett. It looks like you can still hear me. Yeah, good evening. Peter Brink with Prine and Newhoff. At the request of the Ottawa County Road Commission, Prine and Newhoff completed a hydrogeologic review for these proposed mining activities and the associated lake expansion at this property at 84th Avenue and frontage. As part of our work, in this situation, we follow guidance from the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, for a hydrogeo review of creation or expansion of a lake that requires a permit. Our work included reviewing existing hydrogeo information that's available from area well logs, as well as historic hydrogeo mapping of the type and thickness of glacial drift or of sands and gravels and clays that are present, as well as the bedrock in the area. We also reviewed boring logs from 5 monitor wells that were completed on site. One was completed in the center of the lake, and if you advance to the next PDF, I think we can see those red locations are where monitor wells were, monitor wells were completed. The 6th location was also a boring to look at the soils there outside the lake. So using that information, we get an idea of what the subsurface looks like, as well as where the groundwater table is present and what direction the groundwater is flowing. We then completed a water budget analysis, again, following the EGLE guidance that takes a look at the overall inputs and outputs of the water to the system before, during, and after the mining activities. Then we estimate potential impacts to the groundwater and surface water and wetlands in the surrounding area based on the net impact of evaporation, precipitation, evapotranspiration, surface runoff, and as well as the equalization of level that occurs when you cut into groundwater, and temporary impact due to just removing soil from that volume. So then finally, we utilized a typical range of aquifer parameters for this type of soil to kind of estimate and bookend high and low estimates of the net effect at those various locations away from the lake, being other lakes, wetlands, groundwater at other wells. And in general, the conclusion of our analysis indicated that the soil mining operation and expansion of the lake will not adversely affect the groundwater or the surface waters or wetlands in the area. To give you some sense, at the lake perimeter, which would be the highest impact, our estimate was on the order of 3 to 8 inches of impact, and then it goes down from there radially away from the lake. And yeah, so I think that's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you both for presenting some information on the project. So next we will move into the question and answer portion of tonight. And just to kind of review and to elaborate on the ways to ask a question, you can submit a question using the Q&A or the question and answer box, which should be at the bottom of your screen. And so you can just type a question in there and send it to us. And then you can also, there should be a hand icon you see at the bottom of your screen. If you want to verbally ask your question, you can press the hand icon, and then I'll kind of be bouncing back and forth between both of those to ask the questions of our panelists. And then if you're on the phone, and it looked like we had at least one or two people who were participating by phone. If you want to ask a question, you can type #2 on your phone, and then it'll raise your virtual hand in the Zoom app. And so then we'll be able to call on you because we'll know your hand is up and you can ask your question. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and see what questions we have here. And so the way this will work is, yeah, I will ask the question, and then the appropriate party will answer it. And again, we'll try to get through as many of these as we can. So the first question I have is, how was the truck traffic route decided, and can it be changed?
That was, went through the public involvement period with Zeeland Township. They dictated the truck directions and routes, along with development of specifications for both noise and dust control. So the contractor will have to follow the dictations of Zeeland Township.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. And then another one, has a full year hydrological study been recently completed for this site? So I don't know if that's
We should probably,
Holly or-
Peter would probably be the one to answer that question.
okay. I think I'm not sure, you're muted currently, Peter. You might have to unmute yourself if you're trying to speak. Yeah, looks like you're muted at our end. Are you there, Peter? Oh, there you are.
Okay, I see a mute button now. Sorry about that.
Gotcha. Yeah, no problem.
We have reviewed well logs and water levels that are available historically. And then we have water levels on 2 occasions from the new monitor wells on site. I guess I'm not entirely sure what is meant by a year's worth of hydrogeo review, but I assume probably looking at those water levels. And I think based on the data available, we have a pretty good idea of the natural fluctuation of groundwater in this area. And we're also informed by knowledge regionally as well.
Okay. Thank you. Why was the original application to Zeeland Charter Township listed as 5,000 cubic yards instead of the 48,9,361 cubic yards on the final application and this permit application? I can read that again if needed.
I'm not sure which application you're referring to. Would that be the Eagle application or a specific application to Zeeland Township?
And if we get a follow-up on that, I can let you know. It just says, why was the original application, oh, it says to Zeeland. So why was the original application to Zeeland Charter Township listed as 5,000 cubic yards instead of the 48,9,361 yards on the final application and this permit application?
So maybe Brett, do you know about an application to Zeeland Township?
I'm not sure what they're referencing on that. I'd have to see the specific document, but we'd be happy to look into that.
Sure.
Okay. Then another question is, can PNN, I'm assuming Prine and Newhoff, provide boring logs for the 6 boring/monitoring wells? They are not in any of the submitted data.
Those boring logs have been submitted to Eagle I believe it was an April 30 communication. Provided by us to Ottawa County and then on to Eagle.
So that is in the file somewhere. It sounds-
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to send me an email directly, I'm happy to send you what's in the current file.
Okay, thank you both. And then I'm gonna bounce, because this I think is the second part of the first question that was asked related to the traffic route. If the traffic route can still be changed by Zealand Township. And because I don't know if there's anybody from Zealand Township, we may or may not be able to answer that question. I think it was related to the first question that was asked.
Yeah, I think Brett was saying that any changes to that would probably have to go through the township. Brett, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, and then also, I guess before you, and then there's another part to that. Can you explain the 10-year duration? So residents will have truck traffic noise for 10 years and can it be shortened? So it sounds, so I guess I don't know what that, I guess that's, I'm assuming that's related to the truck traffic question.
And that would also be for Brett.
Okay.
Yeah, I only heard part of that, but I'll answer what I thought I heard, and if you need more, let me know. I think the one question was about if truck routes can be changed, and then the second is about the 10-year period. Is that
Yeah, that's correct. And if the 10-year period can be changed or shortened.
right? Once all this process is completed, then the road commission will go out and get proposals from contractors, and then our board will select the best qualified contractor to do the work. Then we'll review what they anticipate for volumes being mined and see if that can be sped up at all instead of 10 years. It could be a possibility. That might be based on supply and demand as well. And then also they can take a look at the routes and see which directions would be areas that they could minimize. And I believe most of the concerns are 84th North or 88th North, I'm sorry. So those conversations be had once a contractor is selected.
Okay, thanks for answering the question. I'm going to switch over to a raised hand that we have. Ben Lichtenwalner. We can unmute you and feel free to ask your question. It looks like you're unmuted.
Right. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great, thanks. First of all, I'd like to sort of a two-part question. One is, repeatedly, we've already heard from the applicant that the truck routes were decided via Zealand. During those conversations, it was implied that they would be considering using 84th instead of 88th for a number of noise and safety reasons based upon the number of residents along that road. They've since not revised their plan according to that. So I'd like them to address why not, because they did say that they would during those conversations, if that's possible. And second, I don't know if you want to do this in two parts, that one first and then the second, or should I just ask the second question now too?
I'd say if it's relevant to the first part, go ahead.
It's pretty independent of the first part.
Okay, then that's me. We'll stick with that first part. Did you get
We've already addressed that question. Those routes were dictated and approved by Zealand Township. And again, once we get a contractor, we can evaluate those a little further.
Okay, so approved, but again, during those conversations, you alluded to the fact that you would revise them or consider revising them. So it's similar to what we just had the answer earlier, where you chose to allude as though you would get the information or make the changes to get approval from the board, but then not make the changes afterwards.
There were no statements about the directions of that. It was 84 South and 88 North are the approved truck routes at this time.
Yep. Okay, so when you guys referred to the idea that you would consider changing it to 84th because of fewer residences on the road, that was not, you didn't intend to actually change it from then? Because it was a discussion in those Zealand meetings where it was very clear that 84th Avenue has far less residences on it, including less elderly, I shouldn't say elderly, retirement, older generation residences, neighborhoods on them, and less traffic. So the request was made that you would put the entrance and exit only off of 84th and not off of both 88th and 84th. You don't remember that conversation?
Maybe it'd be better to go to the second part of your question.
Sure,
because
sure.
We've already talked.
That
We've already-
part of the question with the township minutes, referring to the township meeting and the township minutes, maybe you want to follow that up with the township for sure.
Yeah. And it would
Yeah,
also be good to hear-
the noise violation is a concern we have, any noise concerns, but yeah,
Yeah.
certainly.
And that
So,
would
okay.
definitely be handled by the township, as far as the route and the noise and how to choose things. That's definitely run through the township. That's the impression I'm getting from the road commission for sure.
Got it. Understood. And then the
And-
second, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
The second part, or second question I had was, adjoining the property or in the nearby area, we have residences that are relying upon well water, and we have agricultural and farm properties adjoining it, as well as, nature preserves, wetland areas. And the fact that we haven't done a full year study of it is a little alarming to me and concerning to us. So what I'm trying to understand is why the urgency? Why, if we've owned the property for decades, why not do a full study of those new cores, which was news to me, which is great progress. But why not just do a full year study to understand how they rise or fall and how they could impact the surrounding environment and surrounding neighborhoods after a full year, rather than just saying, well, we've done a study of one core drilling and used well water history data that is offsite instead of there on site. So that's my concern, is why the urgency? Why not do a full year study of it and then proceed?
Yeah, we at the department want like the most latest information as well. So maybe Peter, if you could talk about more specifically what information you incorporated to come up with your figures. Yeah, that's something we'll be asking at the department as well. I'm sure that you have some recent data that you're utilizing, and if you could just be more specific about that for Mr.
Lichtenwalder, it's a tough one.
L.
Thank you, Ellie.
That would be lovely. If you could do that, please, Peter.
Sure, not a problem. I guess I understand your question and I understand the concern. However, we do know, just because we know hydrogeology of this area and really across Michigan, it's very common for groundwater to vary on the order of multiple feet year to year or even seasonally. But when we look at the impact based on these changes to the site, it's really an additive impact on top of those existing normal fluctuations. So when we look at the nearest private well to the lake and we calculate that the impact might be 1 to 3 inches at that well, that's going to be on top of whatever we would see for a natural fluctuation if we could monitor it for a year or a few years. But I guess the takeaway is when we see those impacts being as low as a few inches, that's not going to be compared to the normal fluctuation of multiple feet over a period of time. It's not going to be an adverse impact to that well. Does that make sense?
I follow what you're saying, and I appreciate it very much, Mr. Brink. My concern is, I'm sure there are extenuating circumstances in various areas and geographies at Michigan, right? I mean,
I think sorry to interrupt. We have a lot of questions here, and I think we're going to have to move on.
can I
And
just,
then you also have a chance to make a statement, during the public hearing portion of this, I guess related to your concerns. But I would like to try to get through some of these other questions because I'm not sure we'll be able to get through them all.
There's definitely, please submit that question in writing because that is a definite part of our review as well, Mr. L. So I'll watch it.
Thank you, Holly, Mrs. V. Appreciate it, Ms. V. Thank you. No worries. And thank you again, everybody, for being here so late this evening. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. All right, I'm gonna try to get to some of these other questions. What is the composition of the material taken from the samples? The permit for the township was for sand removal, but this permit is used for sand and gravel? Question, it's a question, but this permit is used for sand and gravel? And again, I can reread that. What is the composition of the materials taken from the samples? The permit for the township was for sand removal, but this permit is for sand and gravel. Who would be the best person to
I,
respond to that?
Yeah,
this is Peter Brink. I think I can respond, assuming you mean what was found in the soil borings that we showed on the map of the locations, that the material is primarily logged as sand. Sometimes the sand is gravelly, a term, and sometimes there's a trace of gravel. As far as the permitting goes, I could let Eagle answer that, but it would be the same permit.
yeah, I'm assuming they're gonna, I mean, the material is varied between sand and gravel, whatever they have out there. They do some treatment. You know, they shake it down to pull out the mix that they want, but essentially that would be the material that's there, the sand and the gravel.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to, actually, this is a follow-up to the 5,000 yards question, in case there are people who are interested. There's some additional information. Follow up on the 5,000 yards. The June 9th, 2020 Planning and Zoning Commission, and in parentheses, Zealand Charter Township minutes originally had it listed as 5,000 cubic yards. They were later amended after the township progressed on the application. The concern was that OCRA was misleading the public comment to avoid raising the concern. They were amended after the township progressed. It looks like this is a comment. There's not a question associated with it, but I want
Yeah,
to
we'll take that as a comment, but I think in general, if you have a problem or a concern about the minutes in Zealand Township, that would be the entity you would contract or contact specifically.
And then, thank you. All right, and then I'm skipping around to try to get questions from other people. Since the lake creation will potentially impact regulated off-site wetlands, does that impact allow the water budget analysis to be used instead of a full hydrogeological investigation? Okay, so it looks like this is kind of a follow-up to the hydrogeo question.
Could you read that for me one more
Yeah,
time?
since the lake creation will potentially impact regulated offsite wetlands, does that impact allow the water budget analysis to be used instead of a full hydrogeological investigation?
Well, I think first, so we submit our estimates of impact on surrounding wetlands and water bodies, and we'll get feedback from Eagle on that. I guess I'm not sure that it's true. The first statement is true, that it could impact offsite wetlands. And that's something that Mario Fusco with Eagle and I can discuss, but we show very minimal to no impact even to the wetlands on site. So that being said, I'm not entirely clear what's meant by a full hydrogeo study either. I think we've done an appropriate amount of hydrogeo study for our goals on this property in order to determine if there is a risk of impact to offsite wetlands.
Yeah, we'll be reviewing that as part of our permit process review. And when Mario, who is our engineer, who is going to be reviewing the hydrogeo study information that Peter is referring to, and I discuss and figure out exactly how many inches are going to be affected, exactly where, then I can figure out and when, because it matters when that water is present in the growing season. Once I have that information clearly presented to me, then I'll be able to make a decision as to what wetlands on site are going to be impacted and what wetlands are not. I don't know if you're talking about a water budget for the wetlands that are remaining, or if you're talking about the water budget's input on the hydrogeo study. So maybe if you could clarify a little bit more, we could be more specific. Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're starting to run out of time. I would like to get to, we have another person who has their hand raised, and so we'll get to this person who has their hand raised, and we still have a lot of questions open. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to get through them all, but I will say, we'll provide these questions to the Eagle staff after, the public hearing for them to take a look at. And then if you have any questions related to the discussion that we had, I think you could we'll provide Holly's contact information. I'm assuming, Holly, that you can be contacted about further questions.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have a question and we don't get to, make sure you type it in or contact me afterwards and we'll get everything answered best that we can.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to go to somebody who has their hand raised. Cornelius or Casey Reinsberger. I will try to unmute you here. And let's see here. Oh, I think I just, are you
should
able
be
to find?
unmuted now.
Okay, you should be unmuted.
Is this good? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So the current permit will allow the mining company to remove really all material up to the edge of the current wetland. So the first part of my concern is how would that progress? And so will everything just be clear cut, topsoil stripped in one fell swoop? Would this be progressive? Who draws the line of where that boundary exists? What would be that first step in excavating the site?
So I'm not sure if Peter or Brett want to talk about that. I don't know if they've gotten that far along in their staging, but if you could briefly just speak about staging.
Yeah, this is Brett again. Apologize, my internet's out, so I'm on cell. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, we can
Okay.
hear you.
All right, good. Yeah, we haven't had a contractor yet, so we don't have a staging. I think they probably would start on the north end, but we'll have to have those conversations with them. And I do know that Zeeland Township's inspectors will be requiring stabilization after certain periods of time, and they'll be coming out periodically to ensure that is done.
And my biggest concern is that the property remaining really will be unusable. And what we'll end up with, well, we'll have a lake, but there will be very little for the Parks Department to develop into that extension of the Upper Mac that we've been looking forward to. There is a plan, and any opportunity to use the already designed plan would be wiped out if this is fully developed.
Brett, the road commission is coordinating with the Parks Department, right?
I've talked to them. They're not.
Okay, well, let me ask Brett if they are. They technically should be, but I can't like make them through our process. But Brett, I imagine you guys are going to be or will be or have been in contact with the parks people.
We've been talking to the Parks Director, and he's interested in, once we have a contractor, maybe working out an opportunity to accomplish their goals and our goals. So that conversation will take place, but that's all we have right now.
Okay, so you're not.
How can
into
we
the details
ensure
of-
we have a plan?
You're not
how
into
can
the
we ensure?
detail. Case, I think that what he's saying is he's not full enough into the details of
Okay.
how they're gonna pull their gravel out to actually have a meaningful discussion with the parks.
But do you understand my concern?
Yes, the
That
potential.
This eliminates any possibility of developing this site.
And I will also, as you know, you'll be able to identify or voice any concerns for the official record during the public hearing portion as well.
Yeah, and that's
Just
definitely
as a
where we
reminder.
want that statement.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for the question. We actually have to get moving on. We're past the 6:30 timeframe we were aiming for, because we wanted to make sure we give everybody, you know, that opportunity to make a comment for the record tonight. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with the agenda tonight. We'll provide all the questions that were asked again to the Eagle speakers tonight, and then we'll move forward here. So, but thank you all for answering your question. There's obviously a lot of interest. But before we actually start talking about and going through the details about how we're going to do the hearing and providing your official comment tonight, I just want to remind you that there are other ways to submit an official comment. You can do it through My Waters, you know, at the link identified in your screen, by email to Holly's email address, and then also by mail to the address identified here. For number 3, I think you can probably take a photo of the screen, you know, if it'll help you identify these. And I'm sure these are also identified elsewhere. And the public comment period after this public hearing will be open for 10 days, which is May 29th of 2021. So you still have 10 days to make an additional comment, you know, either to kind of elaborate further on any comments you make tonight, or if you don't want to provide a comment tonight, you can do that through one of these other ways. So just wanted to point that out before we begin. And so now we're going to start the official public hearing portion of this. And so Holly, I'd like to invite you to, I guess, give the hearing statement for tonight.
Okay, thanks, Brian. This is the official part that is going to be recorded. I have some information I need to read to you, so bear with me. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The public hearing is being held virtually per Ottawa County's 6th declaration of a local state emergency. The order does not expire until May 24th of 2021. As you know, my name is Holly Vickers, and I'm the district representative in the Transportation Review Unit, Water Resources Division of the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE. I'll be serving as the hearings officer for this public hearing on the EGLE submission number HP 6FGWS. And with me tonight is my boss, Jim Watling, co-workers Ashley Rosnowski and Mario Fusco. For the public hearing agenda, I'm going to start with giving some background information about why we're here. I will then describe the purpose of the hearing and how your comments will be used. Following that, I will outline the procedures under which we will take your comments and then describe what will happen after tonight's meeting. It will then be time for you to provide your comments, and we will spend the majority of the time tonight listening to your comments. At the end of the hearing, I will provide a short summary and closing. By way of the background information, the WRD is responsible for administering a variety of programs that help protect inland lakes and streams, wetlands, floodplains, and sand dunes of the Great Lakes. These programs regulate certain activities such as dredging or filling a lake, stream, or wetland, constructing a dam, constructing a marina, placing shoreline protection, or constructing docks and building in a designated critical sand dune area, wetland, or floodplain, basically all your natural resources. The law governing these responsibilities is the Natural Resources and Environmental Protection Act, 1994, PA 451 as amended, commonly referred to as the Act or Act 451. We are here tonight because the Ottawa County Road Commission has proposed to mine exactly 489,361 cubic yards of sand from the west half of the existing 84th Street gravel mining site enlarging the 2 existing open water ponds, which total 6.5 acres, into a single 29.6 acre lake approximately 10 feet deep. By preserving some of the remaining existing wetlands and creating more, create approximately 2.62 acres of pre-mitigation wetland. Purpose of the hearing is in order for a permit to be granted, Eagle must find that the proposed activities described in the public notice meet certain criteria set by Part 301, inland lakes and streams, and Part 303, wetlands protection parts of the Act. In general, we must consider the effect of the proposed project on the streams and the wetlands. When reviewing an application for permit under the provisions of Part 301 and 303 of the Act, we're charged with making the following considerations as required by Section 30106 of Part 301. That would be 1, the department shall issue a permit if it finds that the structure or project will not adversely affect the public trust or riparian rights. And 2, the department shall not grant a permit if the proposed project or structure will unlawfully impair or destroy any of the waters or other natural resources of the state. So when reviewing the application for permit under the provisions of Part 303, which is wetlands protection of the Act, we're charged to make the following indications as required by Section 303.11 of Part 303. A permit for an activity listed in Section 303.04 shall not be approved unless the department determines that the issuance of a permit is in the public interest, that the permit is necessary to realize the benefits derived from the activity, and that the activity is otherwise lawful. 1, a permit shall not be issued unless it is shown that an unacceptable disruption will not result to the aquatic resources. And 2, a permit shall not be issued unless the applicant also shows either of the following. A, the proposed activity is primarily dependent upon being located in the wetland, and B, a feasible and prudent alternative does not exist. The purpose of tonight's hearing is to give anyone interested in Ottawa County Road Commission's proposal an opportunity to provide information that we can use in making the decision whether or not to issue a permit. Please recognize that we can only use the information you provide if it relates to the criteria that Eagle must use in making a decision. Some of you may simply want to express your support or opposition to the project. We'll be happy to make note of your position, but please understand that Eagle is by law not allowed to base our decision on whether or not there is widespread support or opposition to the project. In just a moment, I'll outline the procedures we will use for taking your comments. But before I do so, I need to mention that the notice of this hearing was published in the Holland Sentinel on Wednesday, May 5th, 2021, and listed on our Eagle calendar Friday, April 23rd, 2021. As we discussed at the beginning of the informational session, if you have a comment to provide, click on the question box in your GoToWebinar toolbar, then enter the word comment and enter your name. To ensure the hearing is conducted in a fair manner, we will follow the following steps. 1, first, the application and or their consultant has already had an opportunity to describe the proposed project, so we've done that. And then secondly, we'll call on those who have indicated in the comment box that they want to speak in the general order that they were received. And as a reminder, if you are participating in this hearing via telephone only, you will only be able to provide comments during this hearing comment period. You may submit your comments. Okay. Yeah, if you're only participating via telephone, submit your comments to Eagle via MyWaters or email or US mail service, and our contact information will be at the end. If you have written comments or materials that you would like to be present, that you would like to present, please email them to me, upload them into MyWaters, or send them to me via US mail to the Lansing TRU office. When all comments have been received or completed, we will ask if anyone else would like to make a statement. So when your name is called, your microphone will be unmuted. As you begin your comments, please state your name and any group or association you may represent. Everyone will be given 3 to 5 minutes, likely 4 minutes, to make their comments. I'll indicate to you, or Ryan will indicate to you when you have 30 seconds or a minute left. I think, Ryan, you're going to indicate when they have a minute left. Please begin wrapping up your comments and end within the allotted time. If need be, I'll indicate when your time is ended. Of course, we ask that you all be courteous and respectful to one another tonight. Only one person should be speaking at a time. Please don't interrupt a speaker, and please also recognize that Eagle staff is here tonight to provide a fair opportunity for you to express your comments on the proposed project and to listen to those comments. The hearing is being recorded, and your comments will be part of the information Eagle will consider in making its decision on whether or not to issue a permit on the proposed project. The public comment period for this public hearing is open for 10 days from the date of this hearing, which is ending on May 30th, 2021. Additional information and comments submitted in writing during the 10-day public comment period will also be considered in Eagle's decision. Additional information and comments may be submitted to Mr. Jim Watling, my supervisor at TRU, WRD, and Eagle. His contact information will be up at the end of the presentation. Following the close of the public comment period, Eagle will make a decision to either issue a permit for the project as proposed or with modifications, or send a letter of denial. You may find out what the decision is by checking the Eagle My Waters website. And it will provide a link for that, and searching for the permit number that has also been previously provided, the HP6ROEX6FGWS. Thanks for your attention. I'll now ask the applicant to, well, no, we already did that. Thanks for your attention while I read through this tedious, monotonous, long statement.
Thank you, Holly. Yeah, just I guess recap a couple things and to go through how we will do these again. We're actually going to give 4 minutes for each comment, and I'll give it 1 minute heads up when we're getting close, when you're nearing the end of the 4 minutes. And I have the people who pre-registered either indicated that they didn't want to make a comment or that they did. And we're going to start with the people that pre-registered. And I'm basically going to go down the line in the order that they registered and wanted to make a comment. So we're going to start off with that. So when I call your name, we'll unmute you. You'll have a chance, to make your comment for 4 minutes. And then I'll also, when I call that person's name, I will let the next person in line know that they're on deck and that they're up next to make their comments so they can kind of prepare themselves. And then we'll go down the line through all 7 that I have on my list. And then we are going to open it to anybody else who would like to make a comment. And once we get to that point, you can raise your hand through the Zoom app. And then we will call on you one at a time to make your comment and go down the line to make sure everybody gets their comment heard. If you're on the phone, again, you can hit #2 and we should be able to see your hand raise in the Zoom app. And another way that I think Holly mentioned was to provide written comments. And what I can do too is I can, if you're on the phone, I can, we're gonna have another slide with the other ways to make a comment, and I can read off Holly's contact info so that you have it and are able to make that comment. So with that, the only other thing I wanted to mention was please state your name. And if there's an organization you're affiliated with, please mention that as well before giving your comment. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started by going through these. The first person that I have identified on my list of people that pre-registered was Jason Keher, K-E-H-R-E-R, and then Cornelius or Casey Reinsberger. So first is Jason. And so I think Joel is going to help me identify.
All right.
Well, we can hear you, Jason.
Sounds
Go
good.
ahead.
Thank you. Holly, good job reading all of that. That was a lot. So my name's Jason Kerr. I live with my family directly across the street from the mining proposed site off of 88th. We live in a neighborhood with neighborhood pond, which is why you probably hear a bit of consternation around this entire process from a lot of our community members. And I think that the challenge that we've had and why many of us are hopeful that Eagle will look at this more carefully is that throughout the entire process with the township and the road commission, it felt like the entire process was rushed. Information was changing in a manner that felt, I guess, somewhat obtrusive. And the way that the community's point of view, the community's questions, and the community's comments was handled was, whether it was rude, dismissed, or overlooked, and all of the above. And so I think that's why there's a lot of comments around how that process went, for sure. And I recognize that this isn't the complete form for that, but our hope is that as Eagle reviews this, there's some level of due diligence that happens, because it didn't feel like there's any due diligence that happened from the road commission and from the township at that stage, whether it was traffic patterns, whether it was impacts on the community, whether it was, our point of view on that, and how it might impact property values and our neighborhood pond, things along that line. And so a lot of the questions said, well, we'll figure that out when we get a contractor. To me, that's almost backwards. And I don't do this every day, so this may be the way it always works, but it feels like we should have a little bit more information before we can make an informed decision, whether it's at the township level, or especially when we're talking about the environmental impact and concerns at the Eagle level. I think the final comment ultimately is we lost confidence in where the road commission was at, where the township's vested interest was at, that there was any ability to do the right thing here and to look at this from a pretty holistic manner. And the reason why we keep asking for a full year hydrological study is that we have a neighborhood pond, and yeah, I get that there's a variance in the water level, but without understanding the entire pattern from a recent study, it's really hard to understand the actual impact. So my question, my comment, my concern is around the real return on impact that's happening here for a relatively small amount of money spread up across 10 years of detrimental impact to the neighborhood, the community, and the environment. So appreciate everybody listening to that. I appreciate the work that everybody's doing to do the right thing and to navigate through this. And that's the end of my comment.
All right, thank you for making your comment. Next up is Cornelius Reinsberger, and then on deck is Martin Landis. So Cornelius or Casey, it looks like potentially you're up. And I think, let's see here. I think you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, there you are.
Okay, great. So like Jason, another neighbor of the property, live on Micah Street. And my comments are more related to unnecessary pressures on the, let's say, the Upper Mac area as a whole. And this area has an amazing diversity of birds, mammals, flora, fauna, you name it. Since moving here, I've just been continually amazed. And just the one example I want to cite for everyone, a couple of weeks ago, my daughter and I went for a hike, took a spotting scope, some binoculars. We started out at the Eagle's Nest on the north end of the property. We both got to see an eaglet, peeking over the side of that nest. First time for both of us. From there, we stopped in the wetlands, and we were able to spot an American bittern, which is relatively rare heron in this area. And it's got a very distinctive call, and was demonstrating it very loudly for us. Again, another really cool moment of observing some cool wildlife. And from there, we went up to the lookout. We counted 25 sandhill cranes all congregated down in the river and the marsh. And they were calling back and forth, dancing, jousting, doing that thing they do in the evening. and really another epic, moment. Those three things in one place, one park. I would challenge anyone to find that kind of diversity anywhere else in Ottawa County, let alone West Michigan. And I'm very concerned that just going in and clearing out half of this property is going to put a lot of unnecessary pressure on what has been an amazing diversity of wildlife here. And I see the eagles fishing the pond on that property. I've seen the sandhill cranes foraging on the property. We have osprey fishing our lakes here.
You have about one more minute, Cornelius.
Sure, I'm just about done. So I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that the Upper Mac area has a really impressive diversity of wildlife, and make sure that you fully considered that in this application. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your statement. All right, so next up is Martin Landis, and then on deck after that, or next up after that is Lena Frody. So we're gonna find you on the attendee list, Martin, and unmute you.
Yeah, I've got it unmuted. You guys hear me okay?
Oh, yeah. Yep, we can hear you.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for your time this evening. I'll try to stay within the 4 minutes. I do have a tendency to be a little long-winded. I put a couple different comments into Eagle already, and my apologies if I reference you guys as DEQ. Old habits die hard. I want to reference and put this on the record. I hope it probably still is in my March 15th, 2021 letter that already references a lot of these things. And I'll keep these short and to the point. The existence of those boring logs, the 6 boring logs, is new information. That's nowhere within the My Water system that I could find, and I've been through it backwards and forwards. So it must be tucked in and hidden somewhere. That was my question earlier. I'd like to see copies of those. I already sent Holly an email requesting copies of those. Specifically, I want to see what the boring logs were, because they weren't brought up in the township meetings. They weren't ever provided at all. And it'd just be nice to see what we're dealing with and when those were actually completed. And because I haven't seen a bore or a punch or a drill out there at all. Which brings up a couple different questions. I mean, even within the summary that Holly started with for the project, she said the board that the road commission or their contractor is going to be mining 10 feet of sand and gravel. Well, one of my biggest concerns and what we've asked for all along is we need to make sure that this isn't going to impact anything. And if it doesn't, we can tell our association, hey, it's fine. There's not going to be a negative impact to our pond or the wetlands or any wildlife. But right now we just don't have that data. One of the biggest concerns that I have is talking about and you can read in my notes, the hydrologic analysis is the saturated thickness of the aquifer, which is going to be a key in those borings. I mean, if you heard what Holly said, they're going to mine 10 feet. They, in their applications to the township and the approved plan, in their cross section, it says that the natural water level is about 596. And clay is about 585 with about 10 feet of saturated thickness. They just referenced, and Holly just referenced the 10 feet of saturated thickness. You read some other stuff, we know that our pond is about 10 to 12 feet of saturated thickness. The pond in my backyard is about 10 to 12 feet of saturated thickness. I'm a geologist, I'm an environmental consultant. Because I'm curious what my house was like, I drilled holes in my yard. I got about 10 to 12 feet of saturated thickness. However, in the Prine and Newhoff analysis, they use 30 feet of thickness. 30 feet of thickness changes that water budget analysis completely. So those boring logs are kind of key. And especially I'd like to know where that 30 foot of thickness comes from. Because if you evaluate what the Darcy's Law and what the Tice calculations require, what that does between 10 feet and 30 feet of thickness is the same magnitude impact. Take for instance, the magnitude of input 2 to 3 times greater is 2 to 3 times greater impact. So for instance, right now they're saying they have 4 inches of impact at a property border. That's using 30 foot of thickness, 3 times what's there. So that means there's going to be 3 times greater impacts. So now all of a sudden, instead of 4 inches, you have 12 inches of impact. Based on calculations, we've got regulated wetlands all the way
You have
around.
about a minute left, Martin.
We've got regulated wetlands all the way around that area with numbers from their water budget that just don't match. And just to wrap, I got lots more I can go to, but what I want to talk about as well is they took off the pond creation or expansion in the southeast corner for this application, though they're still going to mine it. There's wetlands around there as well. If you're familiar with the area, this area floods. It floods in the spring. That's not going to be 2 separate lakes. That's going to be 1 separate lake and should be a consideration within the JPA and the Eagles purview. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, so next up is Elena Orlana Frody. And then after that, it is Tara Meyering. So Elena Frody is up right now.
Yep. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
My concern that I have is this 10-year window. Like has been mentioned earlier, these areas are wetlands and natural areas and lots of creatures and habitats. And I'm just curious what the effect will be when you've got disruption for 10 years. I'm not a scientist. I don't know about this stuff, but doesn't seem like a very big piece of property to take 10 years. So that's my biggest concern, is just that the whole wetlands, habitats, creatures to be interrupted for 10 years. I'm curious. I got to think that that's got to be quite a negative effect. Trucks, noise, disruption, all that stuff. So that's just my concern. If this ends up going through, I hope it's much shorter than 10 years.
Thank you for your comment. All right, so next up is Tara Meyering, and then Ben Lichtenwalner after Tara. So Tara, are you?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, you can go ahead and make your comment.
Thank you. I'm a neighbor to Jason, Case, Marty, Lana, and Ben. And I think you can hear that we are concerned about any kind of development or thing that's going to impact our community for various reasons. And I echo all of their concerns that are our concerns as a family. I would also like to make it known that I'm not a scientist either, but common sense just kind of brings to light a fact that Lana was alluding to, the impact over 10 years. And I would add to her comment is dust over 10 years to humans. I am not really interested in wearing masks for 10 years out here. So I just wanted it to be known that that is also a concern of mine and our family, other than what has already been said. And if I could defer the remaining time I have to Marty, I would like to do that.
Yeah, it's going to be four minutes per person. So to make it even, we're doing by person. So, but you can always submit comments, the other ways by email through My Waters.
Perfect.
And then also in writing.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you. All right, so the next up is Ben Lichtenwalner, and then Brett Laughlin after that.
Great. First of all, Ryan, you did a great job with my last name. I'm impressed. Many people get it right. All right. So most of my questions and concerns were addressed in the Q&A already. I just wanted to call attention to 2 quick things still. The one is, most of the maps that were presented, if you look at them, they're either zoomed in really closely on the property or really far out. And one of the reasons why I hope Eagle takes a close look at this is because there are a lot of properties adjoining it or in the immediate vicinity that are either reliant upon private well water or farming and agricultural related in the area. So in addition to the big neighborhoods like ours that have the big lake that is, could be impacting property values, there's also a lot of individual residences that may or may not be here this evening that have their private businesses and farms or homes that could be impacted. So just keep that in mind. I'm sure you normally would consider that anyways at Eagle. And then the second piece, I was under the impression, and I may be wrong, I thought Eagle also had oversight of noise violations or pollution rather, noise pollution. And so going back to the 84th versus 88th, obviously if the truck traffic were on 84th, it would be, there's only a single residence there versus 88th. You've got, hundreds of residences up and down that road and many big neighborhoods. So I don't know why we couldn't just route the traffic out there based on noise pollution concerns, but again, that may not be for Eagle. I thought it was. So everything else I had was pretty much covered in the Q&A. And thank you all for, again, being here this evening and taking your time to listen to us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your comment. All right, so next up, and this is the last person on my list. And if you just recently registered, you might not be on here, but feel free to raise your hand or provide comment by one of those other means tonight. Brett Laughlin. Looks like you're unmuted. You can go ahead and give your comment.
Hey Ryan, this is Brett Laughlin with the Road Commission. I just registered to do the presenter, but I would like to take the opportunity to thank everybody for taking time out to provide these comments. We are listening to those, and especially on a beautiful evening like this. So again, we appreciate you taking time out of your day to provide these comments.
Thank you. All right, so now that's the list that I have right now, but if anybody else who didn't register and identify that they wanted to make a comment, or if you did register and identify that you didn't, you're welcome to make a comment right now. You just need to hit the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. So that way it'll raise your hand on the attendee list, and then we can call on you to make a comment. So it looks like, all right, so it looks like I have a hand raised. Molly Kerr. It looks like you're unmuted on our end. You can unmute yourself, feel free, and then you can go ahead and make your comment.
Great. Hi, thank you. Molly Kerr, also a neighbor of those who've already spoken. And my concern that maybe has not been raised yet tonight is, as a parent of children, younger children who live in this area, who are transported to and from school and find recreation where they live. Regularly, I drive this route on 88th multiple times a day, and I observe a number of school buses stopping on 88th and dropping students off who cross the road. I also observe plenty of cyclists, walkers, runners, and elderly people and pets all along 88th. And we also have the concern of the bridge over the overpass over I-96, 196. I'm very worried about the wear and tear to that bridge and what that might look like, or what the follow-up for that would be, or a plan to cut off access to 88th to repair that I'm sure would be quite an undertaking. But more importantly, as I watch many children across the road all day, every day, the concern certainly for their safety with regard to truck traffic back and forth, and certainly for walkers and bike riders as they go over the bridge and things. I feel like that would probably eliminate people's ability to move freely about this road, which would impact thousands of people and at least hundreds of homes. And also too, from an environmental standpoint, as Tara mentioned before, the air quality and the water quality for those of us who live in this area will be likely significantly impacted. And that is a high concern, not just as somebody who lives here, but as someone who's raising children and who hopes for them to live healthy lives. So that's my comment.
Thank you for making the comment. All right, is there anybody else who hasn't made a comment yet who would like to make a comment tonight? And again, if you're on the phone, calling in by phone, you can select #2, and then you'll be able to raise your hand virtually in the Zoom app, and we'll be able to unmute you. And I think you'll receive a prompt to unmute yourself and then can make your comment. I'm still don't have anyone else at this point. We'll give it another minute. And again, I should mention that in a couple slides here, or maybe it's the next slide, we are going to go through kind of the other ways to make a public comment again, for those of you who might have missed it. In case you didn't want to make your public comment tonight, you're certainly welcome to provide one by the other ways we'll be mentioning here. So I think this is going to be the last call for anybody who would like to make a comment tonight, to go ahead and raise your virtual hand in the app and hit pound. You can hit #2 if you're on the phone. All right, let me just check. No, I'm not seeing any hands raised. So at this point, Holly, if you want to go ahead and read the closing hearing statement.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So thank you for your comments and your cooperation tonight. We appreciate your interest in the proposed project and that you took the time to be here. As indicated at the beginning of the hearing, you may submit additional written comments until May 29th. I think I said May 30th at the beginning, but 10 days is actually May 29th, 2021. Following the close of the public comment period, we will consider all comments received and then make a decision on the proposed project. Just to remind those that still want to submit a comment, comments can be submitted via MyWater's email or regular snail mail. The hearing is now closed. Thank you again.
Thank you, Holly. All right, and again, as promised, these are the other ways you can make a public comment. By MyWaters, the MyWaters system, for those who are familiar with that, by email. And I'm going to read this off in case there are people who are on the phone who might want this email address. It's vickersh@michigan.gov. That's Michigan spelled out MICHIGAN. And again, vickersh@michigan.gov. And then by mail, and that's to the State of Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Water Resources Division, Transportation Review Unit. And that's Post Office Box or PO Box 30458. And again, that's 30458, Lansing, Michigan 4909. So 4909. And then the comment period after this public hearing will be open for 10 days, which is May 29th. And again, who to contact for further questions, you can contact Holly. Her phone number is 616-295-2787, and that's Holly Vickers at 616-295-2787 at the email address that I had previously provided. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can get a hold of Holly that way. And so with that, I'd like to invite Jim. Did you want to make a couple closing comments for tonight's hearing? Jim Watley?
Sure. I'd like to thank everyone for participating. I know it's one of the nicest summer evenings we've had, or summer feeling evenings. And we are going to look at all these comments and make sure that we address the concerns that are within our ability to address, and provide answers to some of those questions that are outstanding that we didn't get answered tonight. So once again, really appreciate your involvement.
All right, thank you, Jim. Yeah, thanks to all of our panelists tonight, who were in the question and answer period, who answered questions. Thank you to everyone that asked questions. Again, I'll be providing the questions we didn't get to the Eagle staff tonight. I just thank you for participating in the process, and I hope everyone has a great evening tonight. Thank you.